Society spends a lifetime saying that a man who never got married and never had children must be carrying some kind of emptiness. They say it with pity in their eyes, with overly polite questions, with that small smile of someone who believes they are looking at an incomplete life. At 76 years old, I can say something that may bother a lot of people. They were wrong about me. My name is John Clark. I have never worn a wedding ring on my finger, never heard a child call me father, never had a full table at Christmas like the beautiful photographs people love to show. And for a long time they made sure to remind me of that, as if my life were a house with missing rooms, as if I had failed some secret test that everyone else seemed to have passed. But listen carefully. Just because one road is more common does not mean it is the only right road. Sometimes what they call loneliness is simply silence without lies. And today, I want to tell you why society was wrong to judge me. There is a kind of question that sounds small when it leaves someone else's mouth, but grows far too large inside of you. And you, John, when are you going to settle down? Did you never want to start a family? Who is going to take care of you when you get old? In the beginning, I answered politely. I smiled, changed the subject, pretended those words had not entered me like a thin needle, but they had. Especially when they came at a crowded table during a Sunday dinner, while everyone talked about children, grandchildren, schools, graduations, and family trips. I remember sitting in those places with a cup of coffee in my hand, listening to stories that always seemed to end at the same point. Someone got married, someone had a baby, someone bought a bigger house because the family had grown, and then came that discreet silence when they looked at me. It was not hatred. Sometimes it would have been easier if it were. It was pity. A soft, polite, almost affectionate kind of pity. But it was still pity, as if I were sitting there representing a future nobody wanted to have. The cruelest part is that after hearing this for many years, you begin to monitor yourself from the inside. You start asking whether maybe they are right. Maybe something really is missing. Maybe your house is too quiet. Maybe your name ends with you. Maybe life has passed by, and you were left holding a freedom that others call emptiness. But here is what no one ever asked me. What if the real emptiness was not being alone? What if the real emptiness was living surrounded by people, while betraying your own soul just to look normal? I am John Clark. I am 76 years old, and I live in a small house in the state of Vermont, where winter seems to teach people to become quiet on the inside. I have an armchair near the window, an old table in the kitchen, a few books marked with pencil, and a kettle that has kept me more company than many empty conversations I have heard in my life. To many people that may seem like little. To me, today, it feels honest. But I was not born knowing that. For a long time, I also thought I had to explain my life as if I were presenting a defense before an invisible court. Walter Reed, an old co-worker from the repair shop where I worked for nearly 30 years, used to say, "John, one day that freedom is going to feel heavy." He spoke as if he were warning me about a storm. Helen Carter, my neighbor from the street behind mine, said I would still find a good woman once I stopped being so stubborn. Frank Miller, a cousin I only saw at funerals and weddings, looked at me as if I had made a mistake I simply had not understood yet. And do you know what was hardest? They spoke with certainty, not as an opinion, but as a sentence. They were sure I would grow old, bitter, alone, regretful, staring out the window at families I had never built. They were sure that, in the end, I would discover they had been right. But now, sitting in this silent house, with my hands marked by time and my breathing slower than it used to be, I understand something none of them seemed able to see. It was not loneliness that almost destroyed me. It was the attempt to live as if I owed an explanation for not following the same path. I was 32 years old when I almost accepted a life that was not mine. Her name was Claire Whitman. She was a good woman, patient, polite, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make everyone believe the future would be all right. She loved gardens, wrote birthday cards by hand, and had a family that welcomed me as if I were already part of the furniture in the house. Her father, Harold Whitman, shook my hand a little too firmly and told me I was a decent man. Her mother, Joanne, put more food on my plate and smiled as if she were already imagining grandchildren running through the backyard. Back then, everyone thought that was the natural path. I had a job, I was the right age, I had a respectable girlfriend, and no obvious excuse not to turn a relationship into a marriage. And maybe that is one of life's quietest traps. When everything looks right on the outside, nobody asks whether it is also true on the inside. One October night, after dinner at her parents' house, Claire got into the car beside me and talked about a house near the school, a bigger kitchen, maybe 2 children, a dog in the backyard. She did not speak with pressure. She spoke with hope, and that was what hurt, because I liked her. I respected that woman. But as she described that future, I felt something inside me slowly close the door. I looked at the empty street, at the dry leaves dragging along the curb, and I understood that marrying Claire would be a well-dressed lie. I would be a good husband out of duty, a proper man in photographs, maybe even admired by the neighbors. But inside, I would be betraying myself. And worse than that, I would be betraying her too. So I did not run from love. I ran from the lie of pretending to love just to be accepted. And when I chose the truth, I discovered that truth also comes with a price. The price came slowly. Not like some great punishment, not like a door slamming in my face, but like small absences that begin to pile up. First, some invitations stopped coming. Couples invited other couples to dinner, families invited other families to travel, and I was remembered when someone needed help fixing a faucet, carrying a heavy box, or picking something up in town. I was useful, but I was not always included, and there is a bitter difference between being needed and being wanted. At work, I saw it too. My supervisor, Leonard Hayes, had 3 children and spoke of them as if he were displaying medals on his chest. I am not saying he did not love them. Maybe he loved them very much. But when he introduced me to someone, he almost always made a point of saying, "John never got married." He likes his freedom, and there was always that small laugh afterward, as if my freedom were a polite joke, a phase that should have ended a long time ago. At weddings, it was worse. I would sit at tables where everyone asked who I had come with, as if a man alone were a chair out of place. Once, at a reception in a church hall, a woman named Beverly Turner placed her hand on my arm and said, "You still have time, John." She said it sweetly, but I heard something else underneath. "You still have time to fix this." For many years, I let those phrases get inside me. I would come home after those parties, hang my coat behind the door, and look at the quiet living room with a weight in my chest. It was not exactly sadness. It was doubt, the doubt of someone who starts measuring his own life with other people's tape measure. But life taught me one thing. Not every look of pity sees the truth. Sometimes the people who pity you are simply too frightened to imagine a life different from their own. Over time, I began to realize something that changed the way I looked at those crowded tables. Not every noisy house was a happy house. George Anderson, A man everyone praised for having built a beautiful family would come to work with tired eyes and silence stuck in his throat. He had a wife, children, grandchildren, photographs on the wall. But he spoke like someone who had spent decades swallowing his words just to maintain the appearance of peace. Ruth Bennett, who lived 2 streets away from me, always said I should have had children so I wouldn't grow old alone. But her children almost never showed up. They called on the expected dates, sent expensive gifts, and she pretended to be happy when she talked about them at the market. But once, sitting on a park bench, she said to me quietly, "The house feels bigger when the person you were waiting for doesn't come." I never forgot that. That was when I understood that society sells you a photograph and hides the back room. It shows the marriage, but not the resentment. It shows the children, but not the distance. It shows the family gathered together, but not how many people feel invisible while sitting at their own table. I don't say this to diminish those who got married or had children. That would be unfair. There are beautiful, honest families full of love. But there are also entire lives built to look complete in the eyes of others, while the soul is freezing inside. And when I saw that, I stopped calling my silent house a failure. That was why, after a certain age, I stopped looking at my house as if it were evidence against me. It was not empty. It was mine. The small table in the kitchen, the armchair near the window, the worn books on the shelf, the clock ticking in the hallway, all of it began to feel less like absence and more like shelter. There were nights when the wind struck the trees outside, and I made myself a cup of tea without having to perform anything for anyone. There was no argument hidden behind a beautiful photograph. There was no resentment sleeping on the other side of the bed. There was no child growing up inside a lie I had chosen just to please others. And I know some people call that loneliness. Maybe for them it is. But for me, after so many years trying to fit inside other people's judgment, that silence became a kind of freedom. A house does not need to be full of voices to be full of life. Sometimes it is enough that you can finally breathe inside it. One of the cruelest lies they placed in the minds of my generation was the idea that legacy has to carry your blood, as if a life only leaves a mark when it ends in children, grandchildren, repeated last names, and family photographs on the wall. For years they tried to convince me that because I had no children, I would disappear without leaving anything behind. But I have known men with many descendants who left no tenderness at all. And I have known people without children who changed the course of someone's life with a word at the right moment, a plate of food, a ride, a letter, a silent presence on a difficult day. I helped neighbors, listened to friends when no one else wanted to listen, worked honestly, returned kindness whenever I could, and tried not to wound those who crossed my path. Maybe my name will not continue on a family tree, but that does not mean my life did not touch other lives. Legacy is not only who carries your last name after you die. Legacy is what becomes more human because you passed through here. Today, at 76 years old, I am not saying that everyone should live the way I lived. I am not saying that marriage is a prison, nor that children are a burden. I am only saying this: no one should be treated like half a person just because they chose a different road. I was never half a man. My life was not a draft waiting for a wife, children, and grandchildren to finally make sense. I had losses, doubts, and long nights, but I also had peace, honesty, and the freedom not to drag other people into a story I could not live truthfully. So, if you have also been judged for not following the expected path, stop apologizing for your existence. Society was wrong to judge me because it confused the common path with the right path. Now answer me honestly. What part of your life are you still trying to justify to people who never lived in your place? If this message touched you, share it with someone who was judged for choosing differently and subscribe to the channel.